And today is about negative thinking and cognitive distortion. For a lot of people, the core of negative thoughts and negative beliefs is really our brain trying to protect us. It's not you being negative. It's not that you're not trying. It's really our brain trying to protect us. You're not pessimistic, and I'm going to talk to you more about what that is and what that looks like. And first, what I want to say is why negative thinking, and this is kind of that train of thought, the negative thoughts. It's not if you have let's say you have a diagnosis. I'm not going to address that in that sense. This is kind of I guess, the umbrella term for negative thinking. And so this resonates great. And if for some reason it doesn't, then trust yourself. Because as you know, if you've been on these, don't put anyone on a pedestal. Like, I'm going to be wrong sometimes. Anyone's going to be wrong. And really trust yourself because you know. So negative thinking, it's so normal. It's so normal. So according to National Science Foundation, the average person, this is not ADHD, this is the average person, has approximately 60,000 thoughts per day, and 75,000 on average are negative. This is the average person, and 95% are repetitive. So 60,000 thoughts per day, 75% of those are negative, and 95% are repetitive. And they say that a lot of our negative thoughts are driven by the fight or flight part of our brain. So this is, if you have it, it's normal. And you can be abnormal, and you can cut that number down from the 75%. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. So then add on top of that with ADHD, we can have more, because studies show we have 10 times the amount of thoughts. So if it's normal to have negative thoughts, if we have 60,000 thoughts per day, 75% are negative. And then with ADHD, we have 10 times the amount of thoughts. It's very likely that we can have 10 times the amount of negative thoughts as someone who doesn't have ADHD. Does that make sense? Because if you have negative thoughts, which we all do, you're normal. And then on top of that, a lot of us have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So it's like an extreme fear of rejection. And on top of that, studies show that with ADHD, we get 20,000 more negative messages by the age of 8. 20,000 more negative messages by the age of 8. So if we already have 10 times the amount of thoughts, and we're predisposed to rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is basically fear of rejection on steroids, is what that is. Creates emotional pain in our brain. And then we get 20,000 more negative messages about our behavior by the age of 8. So we can take that on. What do we expect to happen, right? Lower self-esteem, self-doubt. 2/3 of people with ADHD have mental health diagnoses. And then also with ADHD, we can have a dopamine deficit. And when you think about it, negative thoughts, even if they're sucky, right, they produce endorphins. They produce dopamine. And so they can almost, sometimes if we're starving for dopamine, our brain's starving for dopamine, which is normal because we're a deficit with ADHD, and it can almost be addictive, right? So if we're not getting movement in, if we're not doing things we enjoy, if we're constantly masking and doing things that aren't natural, that aren't enjoyable, if you're forcing yourself to do things day after day after day, and you're at a dopamine deficit, and you're not finding healthy ways to get that dopamine endorphins, sometimes our brains are like, hey, we need dopamine, we need endorphins to get things done. And just subconsciously, it can bring on more negative thoughts, which, and this, for a lot of us, like, we can feel better after we work out or we go for a walk or something that produces endorphins. So now the brain's not saying, hey, I got to go find some, or I got to create it. Another thing, and I'm going to give just a little bit more of like why this is normal and why it's a little bit more for us with ADHD. And then I'm going to go through the 10 cognitive distortions, because the key to this is identifying what's showing up for you. And then I'm going to talk to you about what you can do about it. So it's more of a tactical approach versus, some Band-Aid that you put on. This is like long lasting stuff. So the other thing with negative thinking, it can be a trauma response. So it could be coping skills that we develop to stay safe. Now they don't serve us anymore. We might be triggered. And so I want to talk to you before we go to the cognitive distortions of like two things that really don't help with negative thoughts. So if you have one example of this is if you have a negative thought and you replace it with a positive thought. So I have OCD and I've done a lot of OCD therapy. I sometimes I don't even hit the criteria anymore because of the different therapy and specialists I've worked with. So one thing I learned in OCD therapy, because we have a lot of thoughts, right? And they suck and they're intrusive thoughts and they're just not good, is the theory of if you have a negative thought replaced with a positive thought, that's actually a compulsion. And we can get really deep down that. So just swapping it with something positive, for a lot of people, that's not helpful. It's kind of like a Band-Aid, but it's going to come back up again. Kind of like, have you ever been to the beach and have that beach ball? It's like different colors around it. You're in the water and you try to push it under the water and you have to hold it under, but as soon as you lift your hands up, it bumps back up again above the water. So what we're going to talk about today is not a Band-Aid. I want to give you tools. I'm going to have a handout that you're going to get too, that I'll send out in the notes within the next probably 24 hours, where you can actually look at this, work through this stuff yourself instead of a Band-Aid. So the other thing, one of the worst things you can do is if you notice a negative thought, is to say, this is the worst thing you can do, dang, I'm being a negative again. What's wrong with me? It is one of the worst things you can do. Gosh, why is this coming at, what's wrong with me? That's the worst thing, because what you're doing is you're kind of scolding yourself and you're teaching your brain to say, ooh, we got scolded. Let's not bring this up again. And so what you want to do is you want to reward yourself when you notice it. And you want to train your brain that you want to be aware of the negative thought, because then you can actually start to shift things and have an awareness around it instead of it being more in the subconscious. So when you start noticing it a lot, at first it can be kind of overwhelming. So don't force it, especially if you're somebody like me that's like, let's get through this. Let's knock this out. Let me get all my negative thoughts and let's just cure all this right now. I'm going to notice everything. Don't flood your system. It's okay to distract yourself. It's okay to ease into it. It's okay to be a little bit more aware of your thoughts. If that's not something you've done before, in segments, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and give it a break. So that's just some big things. We want to reward ourselves for identifying a negative thought. And then now I'm going to talk to you about the cognitive distortion, because this is really like the core of the call. And having a name for this is really what can move you forward. So a cognitive distortion, what that is, it's biased thoughts that are influenced by emotions and can be inconsistent with reality. So we could take the term negative thinking and probably apply that definition as well. Biased thoughts that are influenced by emotions and can be inconsistent with reality. I also call it a false narrative. A false narrative, because again, our brain's really a lot of times trying to help us. It's trying to help us. It's trying to protect us. It's trying to keep us safe. That's what a lot of negative thoughts are. And so here are the 10 cognitive distortions. And I'm going to do a screen share so you can see these. And this is from David D. Burns. This is Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy. This is a book that a lot of therapists really refer to around this. And I actually got this from one of my therapists, and it was huge. So these are the cognitive distortions. So see which ones resonate for you. And this one, the first one, all or nothing thinking. You look at things in absolute black and white categories. Very common with ADHD. Like a lot, this is just common right out of the gate, even if you haven't had a lot of trauma. And then it's also substance abuse, very common. Big trauma responses, kind of the reptile brain, right? A lot of negative thoughts are survival instincts. This is the reptile brain saying, is this safe or not? Because we need to know right now. We can't think in the gray. We've got to say, is this person safe or is this not? Is this situation safe or this not? So again, know that this is not coming from a brain that's negative or you're a pessimist. This is a survival thing that a lot of us have. So that all or nothing thinking, you look at things in absolute black and white. Man, I'm either going to win or I'm going to fail. I'm doing great or I'm doing bad. I'm going to succeed or not at all. I'm either going to crush this or I'm going to do terrible. This person's either a good person or they're all bad. That's all or nothing thinking, black and white. The next one is overgeneralization. You view a negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. So, for example, I missed this listing appointment. I didn't get it. I'm probably going to miss the next one. Probably not going to get it. Man, this is just going to keep happening. I don't even know if I should be in the business anymore. Overgeneralization. Mental filter. You dwell on the negatives and ignore the positives. This is big too with rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I do this sometimes. until I check myself, and I still do it once in a while. I'll do one of these calls, let's say, and there'll be one little thing that I wasn't sure if I made somebody wrong or not, and I'll think about that primarily. So, and then I'll forget the good stuff. So I used to, now I'm getting better. I used to watch these recordings in the beginning to interrogate reality, which I'll talk to you about how to work with these, because there's tools if you catch yourself. So you might still have these, might not go away, except you're going to have something you can do about it right away, so it doesn't like drain you or take you down. And what I'll say is it can get so much better, so much better. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you've got a lot of negative thoughts, just know that you can cut those in half, even more so, by doing some of the work around that. And obviously go to a therapist too, if you need, that could be helpful too. So mental filter, that one, discounting the positive. You insist that your accomplishments or positive qualities don't count. I don't know about you, I've had that in coaching clients where they have this huge year. And it's like, oh, I was just lucky I partnered with a builder. It's instead of, hey, you're getting more rapport in your market. People are respecting you more, or you did a good job on the list appointments. So it's discounting the positives or the good things. Then we have jumping to conclusions. So mind reading. So you assume people are reacting negatively to you when there's no definite evidence for this. Or fortune telling. You predict things will turn out badly. So this is another one. If the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which a lot of us have, some people say almost all of us have, is even if it's neutral, we can perceive that it was negative, even if it's neutral. And so we might have this projection in our mind that we're putting on someone, and they thought it was great, or they thought it was neutral. So jumping to conclusions, mind reading, we don't know unless we ask. So that's another one. Magnification or minimization. So you blow things way out of proportion, or you shrink their importance inappropriately. So again, if you're, let's say, on a listing appointment and you said something and you just can't get out of your head, oh my God, it's this huge thing. Gosh, this was such a big deal. This was such a big thing. You can't let it go. You're magnifying it to a thing it's really like, it's not interrogating reality. It's magnifying it where it feels so big and it's really not. Emotional reasoning for this one, I only like the half of it. I wanted to cross this off, and I'll explain that in a second. So emotional reasoning, I feel like an idiot, so I really must be one. So we're saying I feel this way, therefore I must be this. So this one, I don't feel like doing this, so I'm putting this off. I'll put it off. This one is the one that I wouldn't portray for our demographic, because again, a lot of us, we don't procrastinate. It's executive dysfunction. So for someone without ADHD, this might be a thing. I think for any of us, if we can do it, we're going to do it. But a lot of times we can feel stuck or kind of paralyzed. So that's the one piece that that I would say doesn't count. But this, I feel like an idiot, so I must be one. I feel like I'm not a good agent, so therefore I'm not. I feel like I'm not cut out for this, so I'm really not. Should statements. You criticize yourself or other people as shoulds or shouldn'ts, musts, oughts, have to, similar offenders. This is a big one I hear all the time as a coach, real estate coach. I should have done that by now. I should know this. I should be better at this. I should do this. Anybody, as we say, shoulding all over themselves with the should? Does anybody else should all over themselves? Okay, that's what Diana Kokoska, who used to run MAP, said. So that should. And I'll talk about the opposite side of this, but just a quick one on this is if you just swap that word with could, it can change the whole energy. I could have done this by now. I could be doing this. That can make it a lot easier. Labeling. You identify with your shortcomings. Instead of saying I made a mistake, you tell yourself I'm a jerk, a fool, a loser. So you're judging an action you took, and then you're making a statement about yourself versus saying that thing I did was not the right action. Instead, you're saying, wow, I'm bad. I'm bad. Instead of that thing I did was bad or not the best choice or not great, And then personalization and blame. You blame yourself for something you weren't entirely responsible for, or you blame other people and overlook ways that your own attitudes and behavior might contribute to the problem. Again, this is a little bit different with ADHD. A lot of us have high accountability to the point where we'll even take accountability for things that aren't ours. I would say with ADHD, you're probably more in this first one. You blame yourself for something you weren't entirely responsible for. You take too much responsibility. You apologize when it wasn't even your fault. That is, I think, more common with ADHD or more low self-esteem, that kind of stuff. So those are the 10 cognitive distortions. These are things you can Google. This is like a well-known theory. It's not like from this person. If you can Google cognitive distortions and these same ones will come up. This is my favorite worksheet on this. And yes, I'll make sure you guys get this. So these are the 10 ways to untwist them. And it's really what we're doing is we're interrogating reality. So do you see how it's helpful to identify this and not scold yourself when you recognize this? Because then we can actually do something about it. So the first thing is we want to identify it. And so when you're having something that hurts, like a thought that hurts, that's how I knew, because I was big in all or nothing, black and white. I have PTSD, I have OCD, I got ADHD, I got trauma, I got all kinds of stuff. So this is my go-to when I get triggered or stressed, was this, like polarize over and over and over again. Even I was working on it, and then I think I got it, and oh my gosh, I'm in it. I didn't even recognize it. So identifying the distortion when you're thinking in black and white or polarization, which is common with ADHD, the all or nothing, the black and white thing, the black thoughts hurt. So if you're thinking a thought that's hurting you or causing harm or suffering, that's a good indication that it might be a black and white thought. Same thing with like depression. If you look at the studies, people with depression have a huge amount of black and white thinking. It's never going to get better. I'm a total loser. Like nobody's going to care. I don't have a purpose in this world. If you're looking at deep depression, which I've diagnosed with that when I was 10, you're going to see a huge prevalence of that. And actually CBT and some of these techniques of identifying it is what can help get you in a different place and address the things that aren't chemical along with some other help. So the first thing is identifying you're in it. This is the biggest one right here. This is why it's so important to praise yourself. You can't do any of the steps if you don't identify you're in it. And it's not going to be perfect at first, you know? So you want to write it down and just identify which of the 10 cognitive distortions you're in. What is that thought pattern in? And so that's going to make it a lot easier. And then we want to look at the evidence. So instead of thinking it's true, we want to actually look at the evidence for it. So if you feel like, oh, I can never do anything right, then you almost want to play devil's advocate and write down some of the stuff that you've done successfully too, and look at the evidence. Like, here's some of the stuff maybe I didn't do right. Here's some of the stuff I did do right. Okay, so it's not this like everything's bad or I'm bad. Some things I do well, some things I don't, and that's human. Like that's being human, you know? So then the double standard method. This is really big, especially because a lot of us can be altruistic and caring. So instead of putting yourself down in a harsh, condemning way, talk to yourself in the same compassionate way you would talk to a friend with a similar issue. So think of like your friend or your spouse, your best friend, somebody. So think if they came to you and they said, man, I am just failing left and right. I don't know if I should be in real estate. What would you say to them? What questions, what evidence would you show them? It's putting yourself in, if you were talking to somebody else, your friend who's coming, or your kid, that's a big one too. What would you do? How would you talk to them? Experimental technique. So you want to do an experiment to test the validity of your negative thought. So this is, and again, try stuff. So if you're in a panic attack and you're terrified that you're about to die of a heart attack, this is the example they give. You could jog or run up and down several flights of stairs, and that's going to prove that your heart is healthy and strong. So some people, when they have a panic attack, they think they're dying or they're going to have a heart attack. So again, do this if it's helpful. If that's more triggering, don't do it. Again, don't put anything on a pedestal. Do what's best for you. But it's kind of challenging whatever that thought is and then seeing if it actually is true. That can be helpful is you might experiment and play with that. Thinking in shades in gray. So they said, although this method might sound drab, the effects can be illuminating. I love whoever wrote this. So instead of all or nothing or that black and white, you can evaluate things on a range of 0 to 100. So if you think, man, I'm not cut out for this. I shouldn't be in this business. I'm not as good as any of the other agents. And then you think, well, on a 0 to 100, you know, where would I rate myself as an agent? You're not going to put 0, you know. You might put 50, you might put 70, you might put 90. So what you can do is when you pull yourself out of the all or nothing thinking, it's kind of that reptile brain. You're kind of pulling yourself out of the reptile brain, the survival brain, and it can soften things. And so you kind of want to think in shades of gray and kind of do that. Survey method. This one's really big. Ask people questions to find out if your thoughts and attitudes are realistic. This is huge. So I'm going to give my own example. Let's say you do a talk at a market center, and you think, man, I missed that. And talk to a couple of people and say, hey, can you tell me 100% truth? What do you think of this? And they're like, oh, it was great. I didn't even notice that. Now we're surveying people. We're figuring out, okay, so that wasn't true. I might have magnified it. Define terms. And this is really interesting. So when you label yourself inferior or a fool or a loser, ask yourself, what's the definition of that? How would you define a fool? How would you define a loser? And then you might see, oh, there's not really a definition, or, oh, okay, that doesn't fit. Then they have what's called the semantic method. So you're going to substitute language that's less emotionally loaded. So kind of like when I said you were shooting all over yourself. If you're saying, I should have done this, I should do this, like I could do this, that's one example. Or instead of telling yourself I shouldn't have made that mistake, you might have said, well, it might be better if I wouldn't have made that mistake. It might have been better if I didn't. So we're softening this because you'll notice it's kind of like the extreme. We want to soften the extreme. Reattribution, instead of automatically assuming that you are bad and blaming yourself entirely for a problem, think about the many factors that might have contributed to it. So we're focusing on solving the problem instead of using up all your energy blaming yourself and feeling guilty. So it's like if you make a mistake with a client and you sit there and you beat yourself up and you're taking all that time, instead you said, okay, that's all right. Oops, made a mistake. How do I fix it? What do I need to do? What does that client need to hear? You're going to move forward a lot faster. And then cost benefit analysis. This is the last one. So list the advantages and disadvantages of a feeling, like getting angry when your plane is late, or a negative thought, like no matter how hard I try, I always screw up, or a behavior pattern like overeating or lying around in bed when you're depressed. You can use it's like a cost benefit. So kind of like, what's the cost of this? What's the benefit of thinking like this? Like, no matter how hard I try, I always screw up. So what's the benefit of thinking that? And then what's the cost? Cost is probably going to suck, right? When you think about that, what's that going to mean? How are you going to show up if you think about that belief versus some other ones? Or I always have to try to be perfect. So the other thing with these extremes, some language that's easy to identify them is if I always, never, every time, kind of those extreme words. You'll notice that I definitely make an effort to say most people this, or for a lot of people this, versus every time you have a negative thought, it's this, or negative thoughts are always this. And you'll notice what's interesting in our industry and just the world, you'll notice a lot of people speak in all or nothing. Bolt sometimes does it. I'm just going to be honest. Like there's some really amazing stuff in there. It's just permeated through our success culture, right? All growth begins outside your comfort zone. That's so all or nothing. That's not true. There's a lot of growth within your comfort zone sometimes too. So you're either, if you're not first, you're last. So some of the stuff is just in our culture too, and it's not always healthy. And so you want to look at that stuff. You want to look at that stuff and just have discernment. Have discernment about it. It doesn't matter who says it. Have discernment for yourself. So those are the 10 cognitive distortions. And then these are 10 ways to untwist this. I'll make sure everybody gets this. These are some more like examples here. This other page that you'll get. Just some more things, should statements, just example there that you'll get in this handout. And then again, they're kind of these are just the different techniques you can use, and a little bit about thoughts or feelings. There's just some good mental health stuff. So I'm going to make sure you get that. So those are the 10 cognitive distortions. Let me go back to it. Let me turn on screen share just as so everybody can see it one more time. Let's see. Okay. Just so you can see it one more time, the 10 cognitive distortions. You're welcome to take a screen share, but I will get this into a PDF as well. So all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, mental filter, discounting the positives, jumping to conclusions, magnification or minimization, emotional reasoning, should statements, labeling, personalization, and blame. So a lot of negative thinking is going to fall under these categories, a lot of it. And so identifying it, then you're going to be able to go to the root of it and start to slowly train your brain, especially if you reward yourself for identifying it. So those are the 10. Now, if you're triggered or you're in a situation where you're stressed, you're more likely to go into those. So know that. If you're calm, if you're feeling supportive, if you're not masking your symptoms, you're less likely to go into those, because again, it's trying to protect us. And so kind of a little bit more of an example, just a couple caveats, or not caveats, just more examples, like anxiety, anger, fear. Those are all things for survival, And so, for example, like it's hardwired. Anxiety is to keep us safe. We're predicting things. We're predicting ahead. That's what a lot of things can be. So if you're like, let's say we're out in the woods and there's a bear, that we narrowly survive, and then we get out of that, and the next time we go on that same clearing of the wood, we're going to be anxious about a bear, because it's like our survival. And so I have PTSD, and that's some of how I look at it, is like, like you're predicting things because you're being prepared to preserve your life, because that's what we're wired for, that's what we're wired for. And that's PTSD, hypervigilance. Anger is good too. It's a boundary. It's when we're crossing a boundary, when we're not being treated well, when something's not right, So again, these negative emotions or things, emotions aren't good or bad. They're there for a reason. It's when sometimes we've had experiences or trauma or things like that, it's then it can kind of go on hyperdrive, and it's not helping us anymore, and it's like our brain's still stuck in that. So that's what it is. And the other thing I want to just mention that may or may not fall in this category is intrusive thoughts, because I think a lot of people have them and they don't know they're normal. And so even if you don't have OCD, having intrusive thoughts are normal. Things that you don't want to happen, things that are distressing. Like, what if I ran my car into this tree? What if I hurt my cat? Like, it's something you don't actually want to happen. And it's even more normal with ADHD. And there's a bunch of different categories. It could be scared of getting an illness. It could be compulsive, thinking about something, hyper focusing. So if you have intrusive thoughts, nobody talks about them. Know that you're not crazy, and if you're having those, it's things that you don't actually want to happen, and it's almost warning you, like, hey, this thing might happen, or we don't want this thing, so let me warn you over and over and over again, except it's stuck on repeat. So that's how I see my OCD sometimes too. And then an action is almost, or a compulsion is then like soothing that. So if you have intrusive thoughts, that you don't have to have OCD, that's way more normal with ADHD as well. And so again, it's about recognizing what's happening, praising ourselves for recognizing the thought, and then having a tool versus let me put a Band-Aid on it, let me swap it with a positive thought, man, why am I negative, right? That's going to keep in the cycle, and it's going to come back again. So those are, again, very normal. Average person has 60,000 thoughts per day. 75% are negative. 95% are repetitive. It can get way better, by the way. ADHD, we have 10 times the amount of thoughts. And that means 10 times the amount of negative thoughts. And then we have 20,000 negative messages by the age of 8. So we might be taking on that critic or that voice, lastly, that's harsh, which is what we've had to survive with at this point, to force ourselves to do things, this pain in our head, to force ourselves to do things because of our executive dysfunction. But now we can take that off, we can take the mask off, and we can use tools that actually work with our brain. And you're going to see those voices and that harshness go way down and get way more quiet by unmasking and acknowledging how your brain works and getting tools in place. So that is what I have. So those are also the 10 cognitive distortions. Thank you everyone for your contributions. I will go ahead and send that sheet out. I'll probably post it in the group too. You guys are incredible, and we'll talk to you next week. All right, have a good one.